Hey there, welcome back to the channel. They didn't think you'd go silent. They were so sure of your presence, your loyalty, your love. They thought, no matter how they treated you, you'd always come back. They thought you'd break the silence first. They thought you couldn't survive without hearing from them, without getting some form of closure, without knowing if they still cared. But here you are, silent, still, unreachable, and it's driving them insane, because nothing shakes a fragile ego more than being ignored by the very person they thought would never leave. They counted on your need for answers. They fed off your emotional responses. They depended on your vulnerability. Because people with fragile egos don't value connection. They value control, and your silence? It's the one thing they never prepared for. Your silence is louder than any scream. It says, I've felt enough. I've said enough. I've cried enough. It says, you don't get access to me anymore. It says, I finally chose myself. And the moment you chose peace over explanation, their power began to collapse. You see, they're not hurt because you're gone. They're hurt because they didn't get the last word, because you stopped playing their game. And now they're stuck wondering, do you still care? Have you moved on? Are you happier without them? The unknown kills them. The silence breaks them. Because for someone whose ego is built on control, your detachment is destruction. Marcus Aurelius said, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice. That's what you're doing. You're not posting for attention. You're not reaching out to prove your worth. You're not chasing closure. You are healing, quietly, powerfully, and they feel it. They feel your absence like a ghost they can't shake off. Every scroll through their feed, every empty message thread, every night they expect a call that never comes. It haunts them. Because your silence is not emptiness, it's evolution. It tells them you're not the same person they could manipulate with mixed signals and half-hearted apologies. You've outgrown that version of yourself, and now the power they once had over you is gone, vanished, like smoke in your rear view. This video isn't about revenge, it's about realization. That silence isn't weakness. That walking away without a war is the loudest message you'll ever send. You don't need to hurt them to heal yourself. You just need to be untouchable, unbothered, unavailable to the chaos. Today we dive into why your silence hits harder than any comeback. Why ignoring them isn't pettiness, it's power. And why the most dangerous thing you can do to someone with a fragile ego is stop responding. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I owe them no words. My silence speaks everything. This is where your power begins. Number 1, ego starves. When attention fades. Ego doesn't feed on love. It feeds on attention, on reactions, on knowing it still has power over you. And when that attention stops, when your energy, your words, your presence are no longer available, it doesn't just confuse them, it terrifies them. Because people with fragile egos don't see you as a human being. They see you as a mirror, a reflection they use to feel important, validated, desired. But the moment you go silent, the mirror breaks. Suddenly, they don't know how to see themselves. Suddenly they have no one to perform for, no one to manipulate, no one to reassure them that they're still worth something, and the panic begins. At first, they act like they don't notice. They pretend your silence doesn't affect them. They might even double down on arrogance, posting, flaunting, pretending they've moved on. But ego is like a child throwing a tantrum in an empty room. It only screams louder when no one's watching. Your silence becomes louder than anything they've ever heard. Because deep down, they need your attention like oxygen. They crave it because it reminds them they still matter. And when that attention disappears, their confidence doesn't know how to stand on its own. That's why silence isn't passive. It's active destruction of their illusion. They thought they'd hurt you and you'd come running. They thought you'd beg for closure, for answers, for one last chance. But instead, you disappeared, not to punish them, but to protect your peace. And that protection, that's what their ego can't handle. Epictetus once said, "If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation." You are no longer complicit. You've chosen to disengage. You've chosen to no longer fuel a fire that only burned you. And now, that fire is dying. Let them wonder why you stopped talking. Let them lose sleep over the silence. Let them scroll through old messages, trying to remember when your energy started fading. That confusion, that discomfort, that quiet pain, that's what ego feels when its source of power is cut off. But here's the truth. They didn't lose you when they walked away. They lost you when you stopped trying, when you stopped explaining yourself, when you stopped reacting to their inconsistency, their games, their crumbs. Your silence is not emptiness. It's your boundaries in action. It's your self-worth finally speaking louder than your longing. Drop this affirmation in the comments. My silence starves their ego. I feed my peace, not their pride. And remember, your lack of response is the clearest message they'll ever receive. Number 2, silence threatens the illusion of control. Control is what the fragile ego craves most. Not love, not growth, not even truth, just control. The ability to influence your emotions, your thoughts, your reactions. And when you stop responding, when you stop giving them something to push against, the illusion begins to fall apart. They no longer get to decide the pace of the conversation. They no longer get to manipulate the rhythm of your attention. Your silence takes away their script, and without a script, they have no role to play. They don't know how to exist when you stop reacting. That power they once held over you, it wasn't real. It was borrowed. Borrowed from your constant need for clarity. Borrowed from your loyalty. Borrowed from your vulnerability. But silence returns the power back to its rightful owner, you. That's why it rattles them so deeply. They're not confused because you stopped talking. They're terrified because they can't control what you're thinking now. They can't predict your next move. They can't fix it with charm or excuses because they no longer have access to your mind. And that is unbearable to someone who built their self-worth on how much you needed them. When you were vocal, emotional, expressive, it gave them an edge. They always knew where you stood. But now, all they know is absence. And in that absence, their ego starts to rot. Because ego survives off illusion, the illusion that they mattered more to you than you mattered to yourself. And the moment you stop chasing, that illusion dies. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's what silence is, strength. Because silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've finally realized they don't get to control your peace. You've recognized that not everyone deserves your access, your energy, your vulnerability. And when you reclaim those things, when you no longer offer yourself up to be played with, it forces them to face who they really are, someone who had control and lost it. Not because you wanted revenge, but because you chose healing. And healing doesn't require a sound. It requires space. It requires distance. It requires removing yourself from the emotional roller coaster that fed their ego and starved your spirit. They will try to provoke you, to bait you, to guilt you, but don't fall for it. Let them sit in the silence they created. Let them fight their own reflection. Because your silence, it's not rejection. It's revelation. It reveals who they are without your attention. It reveals how shallow their power was. It reveals the truth. They never had control. You just finally stopped giving it to them. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I'm no longer controlled by ego games. My silence is my clarity. Stay quiet. Stay grounded. Let them unravel. Number 3. They hear your silence louder than your words. You could have written them a book about how they hurt you. You could have explained your pain in 1,000 ways. You could have yelled, cried, pleaded for them to see what they were doing. But none of that would have shaken them like your silence does. Because silence has a weight that words can't carry. It forces them to sit with what they've done. It gives them no escape, no excuse, no emotional outlet to manipulate. They hear it. In the late hours of the night when the world is quiet and their distractions run dry, your silence speaks louder than anything you've ever said. It echoes in the spaces where your love used to live. It haunts the places where your energy used to hold them up. And suddenly, they realize that the connection they thought they could always return to is gone. You see, words can be argued with, dismissed, twisted. But silence? Silence can't be misinterpreted. It's final. It's solid. It holds power because it offers no validation. And for someone who needs to feel important, that absence of attention is unbearable. They check their phone again and again. They scroll through old messages trying to read between the lines. They wonder why you haven't reacted, why you haven't reached out, why you don't seem to care. But it's not that you don't care. It's that you finally care more about yourself than proving your worth to someone who never saw it clearly. Seneca once said, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." And your silence is that courage. It's the act of choosing peace over performance, of choosing self-respect over being understood by someone who never really listened anyway. They're hoping you'll break the silence, because once you do, they'll feel powerful again. But don't. Hold your silence like a sword, because every day you stay quiet, they feel the shift. Every day you don't respond, they hear a version of you they never expected. The version that's done trying. The version that has nothing left to explain, nothing left to give, nothing left to fix. That's what their ego can't handle. Not that you're angry, but that you're indifferent. Indifference is poison to pride. And when they realize your silence means you've emotionally outgrown them, it breaks them. So let the silence speak. Let it say what you no longer need to. Let it echo through their ego until they finally understand that you're not coming back. Not because you're bitter, but because you're better. Drop this affirmation in the comments. My silence is louder than any apology they never gave me. You've said enough. Now let them listen to the quiet. Number 4. Your detachment confirms their irrelevance. Nothing breaks a fragile ego more than realizing they no longer matter to you, not just in words, but in energy, in your silence, in your emotional detachment, because attention was their currency. Your emotions were their scoreboard. As long as you still reacted, whether in anger, sadness, or hope, they believed they still had power. But detachment? That's different. Detachment isn't silent suffering. It's sacred distance. It's the moment they realize they've been replaced in the one place they thought they'd always live. Your mind. You stopped thinking about them when you woke up. You stopped checking their stories. You stopped playing imaginary conversations in your head. And that is what destroys them. Not that you're angry, not that you're cold, but that you're simply free, detached, emotionally neutral, unavailable, because people with fragile egos can't survive being irrelevant. They're addicted to significance. They rely on knowing they left a mark, even if it's a wound. But you've stopped bleeding. You've stopped giving them that satisfaction. You've healed the part of you that used to need their attention. And now, their ego is standing in an empty room screaming into silence. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. You've won your freedom by refusing to be pulled back into their emotional circus, by walking away with dignity instead of drama. That's what hits them hardest. You didn't leave with an explosion. You left quietly, fully, permanently. And that kind of exit doesn't just sting, it scars. They wonder why you don't care, why you don't ask about them, why you don't try to fix things. And that wondering becomes their torment, because you've done something they never expected. You stop trying to be remembered. You've outgrown the need to be missed. That's detachment. That's what says, you are no longer important to my life's direction. And the ego, it can't handle that message. It tries to bait you back with breadcrumbs. A like here, a story post there, a vague text just to test your temperature. But don't fall for it. That's not care. That's insecurity fishing for relevance. Don't respond to see if they still want you. Stay silent to show you don't need them. Because the moment you react, even a little, you tell them they still matter. And they feed on that. But your silence, your peaceful, grounded, beautiful silence, tells the truth. They don't. They don't matter like they used to. They don't get to sit at your table anymore. And that rejection isn't loud. It's invisible, but it's absolute. Drop this affirmation in the comments. My detachment is proof of my growth. They no longer have a seat in my mind. Let them feel that emptiness they created. Let them realize you filled it without them. Number 5. When you don't react, they're forced to reflect. They expected a storm when they hurt you. They braced themselves for your anger, your tears, your emotional outbursts, because that would have made it easier for them. That would have allowed them to feel like they still mattered, like they still had access to your heart, even through pain. But when you didn't react, when you gave them nothing, they were left with something far more dangerous: silence. And in that silence, they're left alone with the only voice that can't be ignored, their own. No distraction, no drama, no reply to twist into blame. Just reflection, real, raw, inescapable reflection. They begin to question what happened. They begin to revisit their actions. They start to realize that maybe they weren't as important as they thought. Maybe the power they believed they had was just a mirror of your kindness, your effort, your love. And now, stripped of your validation, they're naked in front of the truth they never wanted to face. They pushed away someone who truly cared. Your silence becomes a magnifying glass on their guilt. Every memory becomes louder. Every message they didn't answer. Every time they made you feel like you were too much or not enough. It all plays back, over and over, in their mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." That's the problem. They can't pretend anymore. Because you're not there to argue, to defend, to give them one more chance. You're simply not there. And the absence is deafening. It makes them realize that your silence is not an act. It's a boundary, one they can't cross, one they helped build with their own behavior. And in that space, they're finally confronted with the truth. Maybe they were the problem. Maybe it wasn't you who was too emotional, too invested, too intense. Maybe it was them who were too shallow, too scared, too selfish to hold something real. And when the ego is forced to reflect, it panics. It tries to rewrite the story. It blames you in silence. It tells itself lies just to survive the shame. But deep down, a crack forms, and it's through that crack that accountability begins. Not because you argued, not because you begged, but because you stopped. You stopped explaining. You stopped fighting for a spot in someone's life who couldn't even fight for your heart. You let your absence speak, and in doing so, you gave them the most honest feedback of all: indifference. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I don't react to lies. I protect my peace. Let them sit in the silence they created. Let them battle their own conscience, because you're not seeking closure, you're living in it. Number 6. The power to ignore is the power to heal. There's a shift that happens when you realize that ignoring them isn't petty. It's powerful, it's intentional, and most importantly, it's healing. When you ignore someone who once had control over your emotions, you're not doing it out of spite. You're doing it to reclaim your energy, your clarity, your peace. They called it silent treatment, but it's actually self-treatment. Because sometimes the only way to heal is to block out the noise that broke you. Every message you don't reply to, every call you let ring out, every story you don't check, it all adds up to one undeniable truth. You've chosen yourself. That's what their ego can't stand. Not that you walked away, but that you stayed away. Not that you went quiet, but that you found peace in the quiet. And the more you ignore them, the more they begin to feel the consequences of losing someone who was never going to beg to be seen. You're not punishing them, you're protecting your future from the past. Because the more attention you give to people who drained you, the less power you have to create the life you deserve. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And ignoring them is your way of controlling your thoughts. It's your way of saying, "I don't allow what hurt me to live rent-free in my mind anymore." They want your response because it proves they still have space in your head. But when you don't give it, they spiral. Their ego spirals, and they start to realize that maybe you've healed, maybe you've grown, maybe they're not the storm in your story anymore. They're just a past chapter you no longer reread. That's the real power. Not silence for show, but silence for strength, because you've seen what happens when you keep responding. You've lived the cycle of false hope, breadcrumb attention, and broken promises. And now, you're done. Not bitter, not vengeful, just done. You've made peace with the fact that some people only come back to see if they still have access. And you've locked the door, not to be cruel, but to stay whole. So every time they try to test your silence with a new message, a story post, or a random "hey," remember this: your power lives in what you don't respond to. You're not being cold, you're being conscious. You're not ghosting, you're growing. And the more you protect your energy from what once shattered you, the more unstoppable you become. Silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's the presence of self-respect. And when they finally realize they've lost not just your voice, but your attention, your heart, your energy, only then do they understand the full weight of your silence. You've heard the truth. Your silence is not the void they wanted it to be. It's the thunder they never saw coming. You didn't need revenge. You needed release. And release is exactly what you've given yourself. By choosing silence over chaos, peace over performance, growth over games. You have proven the one thing their fragile ego could never handle. You are no longer under their control. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, and you have repainted your soul with calm clarity, no longer splattered by their storms. Every unread message is a boundary. Every ignored call is a reminder. Every quiet sunrise you greet without them is evidence that freedom is the greatest flex of all." They will replay your silence 1,000 times, but you will only replay your peace. They will wonder if you ever cared, but you will know you finally cared enough about yourself to walk away. And that private victory will echo louder than any public fight could have. Let your life speak the sentence your lips no longer need to. I chose myself, and it was enough. The old version of you waited for closure, begged for answers, feared abandonment. The new version of you understands that closure is a personal decision. Answers are overrated, and self-love never abandons. You are not softer for your silence, you are sharper. You are not weaker for your absence, you are wiser. And now, it's time to use that wisdom. Hit the subscribe button because this is only chapter 1 of your comeback story. Turn on notifications so every new video reminds you to guard your energy like gold. Share this message with someone else who is trapped in the noise and needs to taste the power of quiet. Flood the comments with the final affirmation. My silence is my strength. My peace is my priority. I move forward, unapologetically. If they ever hear from you again, it will not be the echo of hurt. It will be the calm of someone who knows their worth and never bargains it again. Remember, you are the storm they cannot forecast, the silence they cannot decipher, the healed heart they cannot touch. Walk in that truth, nourish it, protect it, and watch how life responds when you no longer react. This is your moment, your choice, your power. Claim it, live it, and never let anyone own your voice again.